So now that we've seen how the business model has changed, we're going to hear from James Dolan, as he does have his hands tied behind his back on what he could really do. There's a lot of guys up for contract renewals. For those of you that are checking out the visual version, as you can see, Jose Alvarado does have a player option. He can opt back in. Mitchell Robinson will be an unrestricted free agent. Same thing for Landry Shamet, Big Mo, and Ariel Hakporti. The Knicks are just below that second apron by $10 million, according to next season's cap projections. So again, these are interesting times because the Knicks do need their credit for the fact that they adjusted the way they built this roster brick by brick as the league structurally changed. These second apron rules were not around in Leon Rose's first couple seasons with the team. Matter of fact, we got to give a shout out to Brock Aller, the way he was able to manage the cap and not even have the Knicks hit the second apron while on a championship run. Again, a lot of things came into play here. You got the development of Deuce McBride, Mitchell Robinson, Leon Rose and his team being able to pivot away from those bad contracts with Nerlens Noel, Derrick Rose, and I believe even Kemba Walker in that 2021 draft to free up the cap space in order to land Brunson and give him that $100 million contract. These are the things that the NBA media will not give the Knicks credit for, because there is no first overall pick that they got. There is no top guy that they landed in free agency. Everything was done brick by brick. There were mistakes made and they pivoted. All this happened while the league kept on shifting structurally with these new second apron rules. But check out James Dolan right here as he elaborates some of the implications of trying to keep this championship team together.
Well, we actually already have met about next season. Right?
Is that right? Well, I know you guys are working out the Duke point guard already for the draft, which is next week.
Right, the draft is that's the
it
thing.
Never stops.
I mean, when you go all the way to the finals, your time period to prepare gets really crunched. So so Leon and I met on Tuesday, and we just did the first overview of.
Is there a feeling
season.
from you and Leon, having had that meeting, similar to what the Yankees did this year, a run it back kind of sense? Or do you think there might be potentially, based on individual contracts, that while the core will be the core, do you think there's a chance that we have 2, 3, 4 player turnover or no?
First off, most of our guys are on a contract. Right. We have a couple guys who are not. If we could bring back the whole team, right, exactly as it is, I think why wouldn't you, right? But I don't know if we're going to be able to.
Just contractually.
Right. Just contractually.
And some guys are going to get bigger paydays, and good for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're willing to stretch, right? But there's certain things in the NBA that you have to be, suicidal to do, and we're not going to do those. One of them is called the second apron. Cannot go into the second apron.
Got it.
But it's but that's up to Leon, right?
He's making all the decisions. You're just stroking checks, right?
I'm just telling him how big of a check I can write, right? I'll write as big of a check as possible, but I can't write a check that goes into the second apron. We've spent on this team over, a lot,
sure,
right? Not just on the players, but on the infrastructure.
Now, right there, James Dolan pointed out one thing with the infrastructure. They spent a lot of money on it. In today's league, a lot of things behind the scenes when it comes to medical staff, the kind of detailing and teams of people you need, even with the hire Brock Aller, the cap guru. There's a lot more technical things behind the scenes that cost more in order to keep the maintenance of some of these organizations. It's one of the reasons why the situation with Zion Williams down there in New Orleans is so bad, because they don't spend enough money on the medical staff. Some of their other departments are lacking. Even with Jeannie Buss and the Lakers, some of the behind the scenes departments, in order to keep the franchise up to date, is not up to par. But again, James Dolan is a dying breed of NBA owners who deep down inside actually wants to win. Again, we're going to take you off your daily algorithms and just get into some more nuanced shit. Just listen right here as Mark Cuban elaborates on the new business model.
I can't afford an NFL team, and I wouldn't want to do it where when you bring in a lot of private equity, when the Mavs, I used to always say that, okay, I'll absorb the losses because winning was more important. But when you have a bunch of investors, you can't do that. It's not all your money. Steve Ballmer can do it, right? The Pacers can do it however they want to do it. But if you have investors, they don't, give you enough money so you can pay $4, $6, $8 billion so that you can, have to put in another 100 million or 200 million every year.
And they're not emotionally invested like you are.
Well, no,
They
it's
just want the
completely
return.
different. And then they won't get to run on the court on the buzzer beaters. It's just not, the squeeze, the juice ain't worth the squeeze.
I thought it was really interesting that earlier when you talked about why you sold, you said, look, to own a team now, the best way to maximize value is the real estate.
Yeah.
You have to have, like, whether it's a shopping plaza, you look at the Battery in Atlanta, hotels. I mean, I'm from Boston. I always think of Patriot Place, which was years and years ago before this became a trend. But it's a giant mall, and there's bowling and
Yeah, we had
restaurants and
Victory
bars.
Plaza at the American Airlines Center, and it did okay, but that's not the business I wanted to be in. The best part about owning the Mavs was I could go out in the court and shoot before a game, and when there was a buzzer beater, I can run on the court and not get arrested. But the emotional connection of it is intense. The anxiety levels, the mental health levels are intense. And so, it was draining, and I just thought, like, okay, it's time. I didn't want to have to worry about building whatever. I didn't want to have to worry about private equity coming in, and the conversations in the Board of Governors moved from, okay, how do we make it better for fans? Not that they don't care about fans, but just the conversation in the Board of Governors meetings was all about valuations.
And that right there is definitely a different relationship. You see now for a lot of these new NBA owners, the team itself has moved into a different asset class, which is real estate. That's what the Dumont family down there in Dallas is trying to do. They're trying to build a world-class resort around the arena. And eventually down the line, when the laws catch up, they want a casino within that ecosystem. The Golden State Warriors was one of the first teams, I would say, in the past few years that have achieved this. They have a whole ecosystem of just things that can generate money, from commercial real estate to fine dining, shopping, a flea market. The Warriors don't necessarily have to play in the arena in order for them to generate cash flow. So a lot of funding is needed in order to set that up. And that's why the Buss family had to sell the Lakers. They pretty much got priced out of owning an NBA team. That's why in the past few years, they fell so far behind the Golden State Warriors when it comes to net worth, even though they are the darling franchise of the NBA.
I mean, when I bought the Mavs, I paid $285 million. 10 years later, the NBA could not sell the Charlotte or the New Orleans team to anybody. It had to take over the New Orleans team, and the valuations 10 years later were still 280 some whatever million dollars. And I didn't care about the valuation. We went through the great financial crisis and everything sucked. People didn't have money. I wasn't worried about that. I cared about winning, and then we got to the point where franchises got so expensive, it was almost always, some level of private equity involvement. And when you're having to bring in money, you're obligated to those people. And when you have obligations because you're raising money, it's not just about winning. Because all those people you brought in, particularly the private equity guys, they don't want to write checks for capital calls because you went into the luxury tax or you were above the second apron.
AKA the reason why Luka got traded. That pending Supermax contract, along with Kyrie Irving's contract, would have had the new Mavericks owners paying over $100 million a year in luxury tax. And after spending $3.5 billion or just $4 billion to buy the team, they probably weren't into that. Same thing for the new Lakers owner. They have not yet improved the team ever since getting Luka, but yet they raised ticket prices in some sections about 45%, even introducing a new 3% admin fee for season ticket holders, which never existed before. So a lot of these new owners are in a situation where they're ready to pimp out some of the fandom.
That's not why they're there. They're not running on the court on a buzzer beater. They're not, they might get, free beers and a chance to get some balls signed for their kids, or maybe they get pictures, and they can bring their kids in the back. It just became a different beast, and it wasn't near as much fun.
Now, see, what's interesting to me is you have guys buying teams who they can't afford it themselves, and that's okay. Bill Chisholm, Celtics, $6 billion, they're approved initially, and then they go out and get the money. And as you alluded to, there's not many places to look other than private equity. And they're in it for the turnaround, and the valuations are hockey sticking like crazy. Right after the Celtics $6 billion, you had the Lakers at a $10 billion valuation to Mark Walter. So now as you look in the next 10 years, you got to think PE is almost always going to be involved.
And let me say this, a lot of that private equity and Saudi money, they're going to want new stadiums and these teams to move further away from the density of these big cities. That's how they're going to get that whole ecosystem around the arenas with hotels, fine dining, and eventually they want that casino right in the same spot.
And, I don't mean it to be like a Pollyannish question, but is something lost now in owning a team? Because as you said, you loved it for owning the team.
It's totally different. Yeah, it's totally different. I remember when I came in and I was the young guy and all the old school owners just hated my ass. Hated. There was one guy, the guy who owned the Pistons, I think it was, and I'd gotten fined already a couple of times. I hadn't even owned the team 6 months. And he stood up in a board meeting. No, I stood up at the board meeting and he was, shut your motherfucking ass up until you have done something in this league. And then I started to respond to him and I called him by the wrong name and David Stern had to step in. But it was just a different vibe. And then as those guys got out, then people came in and they were more like me, right? They loved the game. They played some, even if they just liked it, right? They played some, and they were more vocal, more connected to the players. And now it's PE guys, and it's run much more like a business than it is as a passion.
And that's where we get a lot of the recent tanking issues where it gets so bad that the league actually has to address it for multiple parts of the season. Those analytical and PE guys definitely see the benefits of not only getting a star player for the cheap for about 7 seasons, but also not dipping into the second apron and participating in luxury tax payments from other teams.
And that doesn't apply to everybody. There are certainly exceptions, but it just changed completely. And, I sold at the end of 23, but I literally had written an email to Adam Silver in October of 22 saying this is what I'm going to do and gave him these exact reasons.
We had Mark Landry in here, who he was in that seat. And I asked him about selling his stake in the Bucks and just how much of it was about Giannis, which he alluded to a little bit. Now, he, like you said, it was time.
Now, Mark Landry and his business partner, they co-own the Bucks. They're another 2 sets of owners that saw that pending contract for Giannis hitting that luxury tax, especially with the league introducing the new second apron rules. And they read the writing on the wall. It definitely was time for them to sell because things were set up for them to pay a luxury tax on that team, probably hitting $80 million plus a season. Also with Mark Landry, he has entered into the whole investment, private equity side of the business where they're strategically participating in certain facets of the game when it comes to that real estate play that I mentioned earlier.
But I also wonder to what extent
he was only there 5 years. Yeah.
Well, that's right. I mean, did you think about the team we have right now, or that didn't come into play?
Didn't come into it at all.
Okay.
Not at all. We had Luka, and the team I put together went to the finals. We were in, decent shape. Maybe not perfect, but decent shape. And so it really had nothing because players come and go. It's just the reality. Father Time is undefeated.
It would be good to get another ring, though.
It's always good to get another ring, but it's not so easy. It takes more luck than anything else.
Or there was going to be a Vegas team.
Well, everybody already knew that Vegas and Seattle were the leading candidates. But, Dallas is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. If you want to do a casino and if you want to build and you're into real estate, there's no better city. And so it made perfect sense. In basketball, I knew exactly what I was going to do when I took over the Mavs. I just don't have a fix for bringing in fans. And by the way, what I did when I got to the Mavs, I did 2 things. I would bring in bands who would play at halftime. So I would have Casey and the Sunshine Band. I would have Bootsy Collins playing at halftime, and after the game. So we'd tease them at halftime, and then we'd play them after the game. But you had to come in before the end of the third quarter in order to be able to stay for it. And then when I first bought the Mavs, anytime the Mavs won, I would open up a $4,000 beer tab in the bar and let everybody just come in and drink.
This sounds like a lot of fun. You don't miss it? You don't want to buy it back?
If there was any chance of being able to do that anymore, I would, but that's just not the game anymore. Fans know it's not always going to go your way. Fans know there's going to be seasons that you thought were going to be good that turn out bad and vice versa. But if you're sharing in the misery as an owner, and you're telling them you're going to do what you're going to do, right? And how you see it. That's beautiful for fans. I mean, that is the way every owner should communicate with fans. There is no business without your fans. And I said it from day one when I bought the Mavs. I don't own the team. I'm just the steward of the team. The fans own the team. If they don't show up, we're done. If, they're not fans, we're done. If they don't want to watch, we're done. If, families aren't Mavs families, we're done. And you can't just accept that that's going to continue. You have to get out there and connect to them. You always saw me take pictures, always. You always saw me sign autographs, always.
We've seen James Dolan come out and interact with the fans a lot more. These new tech bros and just private equity guys don't have the same relationship, and it's not really a guarantee the way we used to know the Lakers owners as being people that wanted to win. Same thing for the Celtics. That aura those franchises have of just being championship franchises is not really a guarantee with these new guys coming in. They've already sort of moved like it. The Celtics quickly got rid of money off their books when things looked a little shaky. Same thing for the Lakers. They got Luka in his prime, and they don't look too pressed to build up a championship roster.
Never an exception, simply because those are my customers. And I don't think we treat them as customers.
I imagine they're betting that the imprimatur of the NBA is part of the value.
Of course it is.
You're in bed with the ultimate.
Of course it is. And there's true value there, right? But part of it is all that money is just supposed to go right to the owners, right? This is just an equity valuation play for the owners. And the smart, I would have been all for it. There's no downside as an owner. But at the same time, you have to look at the fan bases. And, I'm sure the NBA does their studies, their research and all that. Adam's not stupid. Mark Tatum's not stupid. Bill Koenig's not stupid. They know their shit, right? But at the same time, I can't even, as, what's the right, not vociferous, but just as committed as fans are to their teams in Europe and the clubs that they've grown up with, they're still more loyal to a team, where here fans have evolved to be more loyal to a player. Right. I grew up a Pittsburgh fan of everything. If I wasn't, my dad would disown me. Even when the Steelers always suck. SOS, same old Steelers. We are the Steelers, right? My buddies were up watching the Penguins late. I just went to a meeting and somebody from Pittsburgh, I was up late watching the Penguins lose to the Flyers. That's Pittsburgh. And that's just like Europe, Chicago, Pittsburgh. That's the way they look at teams. And walking into that set of circumstances thinking just because you're the NBA, I think that arrogance will backfire.
And the fans have a lot more options, especially different generations of fans when it comes to entertainment. They don't necessarily have to wait on a tanking team to actually come up. That right there is a blind spot that some of these private equity guys have when it comes to the fan loyalty. They assume it's always going to be there. And even Mark Landry has been on record saying that during those times, they could keep raising prices. Matter of fact, you can hear directly from him. Just peep the mindset. And remember, he's no longer on the owner's side, but he's on the investment side when it comes to these franchises.
Look, you only make money in sports three ways. So it's ticket sales, sponsorship, and media. So if the Celtics win again, they'll be able to raise ticket prices anywhere between 10 to 20%. If you have a team that's the worst in the league, that team is still raising prices 5, 10%. Nobody stops giving up on their team. It's actually one of the great little secrets about pro sports. Every year, the whole mantra in sports is next year is our year, right? And everybody believes that. So I think you're always going to see that teams are going to keep on growing at sort of anywhere between 10% to 15%. I think if you own the real estate, you'll end up growing faster because you can end up having concerts. You can do everything within your own arena. So I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately the Celtics end up building their own arena.
So now we're seeing the mindset, and we're going to tie this all in to just James Dolan being a dying breed of NBA owners, especially trying to keep this championship roster together heading into the next season. So jumping right back into Mark Cuban, we're going to hear him now talk about the real business side of just being on streaming And it's not necessarily about the ratings, as things have evolved into a subscription and data collecting business.
It's not so much about how much new basketball, it's about revenue streams. Because right now, sports is doing really, really well on all medias, right? Streaming, it's killing it. But the unknown parameter, the unknown KPI, if you will, is retention, is subscription retention. I think what broke the bank for everybody and was a blessing to all sports teams was when Peacock spent $100 million on the NFL and got one game and got 3 million subscribers and retained all of them. That became the benchmark. And they went out and spent $2.6 billion with the NBA. And, now that they've got about 9% churn, I don't know what the number is that says above this number, it's not good, or below this number, it's fine. But it's not about ratings anymore. We like to cover, you guys love to talk about ratings. Ratings are irrelevant. It's subscriptions and churn. Do you create new subscriptions? Because that's the money. Yes, they sell ads, and yes, they want to sell more, but that's not the primary source of revenue.
Now, not everything has the sticking power of NFL and getting one NFL game.
Even the NFL, right? I mean, every professional sports, any league that makes their money from TV, quote unquote, right, whether it's streaming or linear, understands that linear TV is dying and is becoming completely dependent on sports, And so when you have 60, 70% of whatever it is of your revenue coming from basically one industry, we would give you shit on Shark Tank, And so that has to be a concern. And everybody looks to that and says, well, we can hopefully get a real TV deal / streaming deal and generate revenue there, or we can sell subscriptions. But I can tell you, when you look at the individual team subscriptions, local subscriptions for NBA teams, they ain't all that.
And that's where James Dolan has an issue with Adam Silver, because for the Knicks, it was kind of all that compared to the other teams. And the way the league is structured today, sort of like an NFL style model when it comes to that TV revenue, giving it out to all teams equally, it took away some of the power that the Knicks have by just continuously diving deep into luxury tax. Long gone are the Isaiah Thomas type years where the Knicks continuously dive into the luxury tax, and James Dolan doesn't necessarily even look pressed. Under streaming, some of the Knicks superpowers have been taken away when it comes to the local MSG network TV revenue. Again, all this applies to James Dolan trying to keep this championship team together.
And so there's still a lot of risk associated with what's going on.
Dying, but not dead yet, as I like to say. I mean, we're living through the transition period.
Yeah, that whole thing when streaming started 30 years ago and we said that, this is what was going to happen, just took a little longer than we expected. But it's still completely dependent, other than maybe Amazon, on subscriptions. And you've got Netflix going to event-driven sports, and that works for them, but their numbers aren't going through the roof.
This is the interesting thing about today's overall landscape. The tech companies have a different metric of success that works for them, but it doesn't necessarily work for any entity that partners with them. The NBA right now, they're in a good media deal, but long term, just looking at subscription renewals as a source of just success, it's going to look funny in the light down the road when they have less and less fans. Especially the connection with the NBA is quite different with younger generations. Ratings overall is a good sign for the league and overall health going into the future. Basing success off of subscription renewals, it only works out for the tech companies long term. Like Mark Cuban said earlier, they want Mavs families, aka NBA franchises, being embedded and passed down from generation to generation. And that is not a guarantee the way the tech companies are measuring success on streaming.
Have they reached a ceiling where you can do event driven or a couple games or Christmas Day? I don't know. But the idea of like, oh, the ratings are up, the ratings are down, meaningless numbers. I mean, that helps advertising sales on the margin, but it's all about subscription revenue, because that is what pays the bills. When Netflix reports their earnings, they talk about ad revenue, but how many subscribers do you have locally or globally? When, NBC Peacock reports, how many subscribers do you have? Disney, how many subscribers do you have? They don't look at the average ratings anymore at all.